My stepmother sold my childhood home for $2.8 million while I was 340 miles away at school. And when I called her, she laughed and told me I did not own a single blade of grass out there. She was wrong by 10 acres. So I let her walk into that closing. I let her sit down at the table, sign the deed, and warrant clear title in front of the buyer, the lawyers, and a notary. And then I handed the developer a piece of paper my mother signed in 2008 and my father signed right under her. What happened in that room is the reason my stepmother lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Paducah, Kentucky today. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you've ever had somebody in your own family decide you were too polite to fight back, hit subscribe to Revenge Lab because this one is for you. My name is Nora Beckett. I'm 38 years old. I've been a nurse since I was 23. The last 8 of those years I've spent in hospice, which means I have sat with more than 200 people while they left, and I have learned exactly one useful thing from all of it. People do not tell the truth until the very end, and then they tell all of it at once. I had my son Miles at 19 and finished my nursing degree with him on my hip, which is a sentence I used to be embarrassed by and am not anymore. His father, Ray, was a high school shop teacher with bad knees and a good laugh, and I was widowed at 34 because he died the way careful men sometimes do, of something that had nothing to do with anything he ever did wrong. Miles is 19 now himself. He's a sophomore in Chicago, and he calls me every Sunday whether he has anything to say or not. And at 37, after Ray was gone and Miles had left for school and the house in Lexington had gotten too quiet to stand, I finally went back myself. Doctor of nursing practice. 3 semesters in, finishing the thing I had been putting off since the year my mother died. That's where I was on the Thursday all of this started. In a lecture hall, with a highlighter in my hand, learning how to tell a family that their person is dying. I found out from a photograph. It came through at 2:14 that afternoon, from a number I had saved 11 years earlier under the name DOT next door. My phone was face down on the desk. I felt it buzz against the wood, and I let it go, because the woman at the front of the room was explaining how to sit at the edge of a bed so a person doesn't feel like you're standing over their grave. When I finally turned the phone over, there was Dot's text. "Nora, honey, is this something you know about?" And under it a picture. My mother's pecan tree, the one she planted the spring my father built the porch. The gravel turnaround. The mailbox with the crooked flag we never fixed because fixing it would have meant admitting it was broken. And in front of all of it, planted in the grass at the exact spot where I learned to ride a bike, a sign. Not for sale. Sold. There was a second sign behind it, smaller, staked into the ground near the tree line. I had to pinch the photo 3 times before I could read it. Future site, the Reserve at Beckett Hollow, 84 luxury residences, Harrogate Partners. 84. You want to know something strange about the human body? Mine did not panic. My hands stayed flat on the desk. My breathing stayed even. 15 years of nursing will do that to you. The emergency arrives, and something old and reptilian takes the wheel and says, "Not yet, not here, you can fall apart in the parking lot." So I sat there. I looked at the sign in the grass, and the only thought that came, clean and cold and complete, was, "She can't have, that land isn't his to sell." Let me back up. The house on Beckett Hollow Road sits on 11 4/10 acres about 30 minutes south of Nashville, outside a town called Farron that used to be nothing and is now, apparently, worth 84 luxury residences. My father, Warren Beckett, is 74. He built the porch. He put in the fence line. He is the most decent man I've ever known and also the most avoidant, which are 2 things that can live in the same person and cause a great deal of damage. My mother was a leaner. Everyone called her Ellie. She died in 2010, when I was 22, of an ovarian cancer that took 2 years and was very polite about none of it. She planted the pecan tree. She papered the hallway twice. She had a laugh you could hear from the road. And 12 years ago, at 61, my father married a woman named Claudia Marsh. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy for me to make Claudia into a cartoon, and she isn't one. She's 63. She's sharp. She stages houses for a living, walks into an empty room and knows exactly which lamp will make a stranger want to live there. She kept my father's blood pressure logged in a spiral notebook for 12 years. She learned which of his shirts he liked and threw out the rest, and he never noticed the difference, and honestly, he was better dressed for it. For a long time, I was grateful to her. I want that on the record. When Ray was sick, Claudia drove up to Lexington twice with a cooler of food I didn't ask for and didn't have to thank her for, and she cleaned my kitchen without commenting on the state of it. That's a real thing a person did. But there was always a second Claudia underneath the first one, and the second one kept score. She kept score about the pecan tree. She kept score about the hallway wallpaper, which she'd wanted to strip for a decade and never quite could, because my father would go quiet in a specific way whenever she brought it up. She kept score about the fact that at Christmas, people who'd known my mother would say Ellie's house out of habit, right in front of her, and then apologize, which was worse. 12 years of that. 12 years of living in another woman's rooms. I understood it. I'm not made of stone. I even felt for her. I just didn't understand what a person will do with 12 years of quiet resentment and a real estate license. I called my father first, straight to voicemail, which was not unusual. He'd started leaving his phone in the truck sometime around his 70th birthday and never really stopped. I called Dot back. Dorothy Prout is 79 years old and has lived on the parcel adjoining ours since 1971. She answered on half a ring, the way people do when they've been sitting with the phone in their lap. Nora. Dot, when did that sign go up? Which one? Either one. There was a pause, and in the pause I heard her decide to tell me all of it instead of some of it. The sold sign went up Tuesday, she said. The developer sign went up this morning. But honey, the survey crew was out here in April. I looked at the ceiling of the study carrel I'd walked into without remembering walking into it. April, I said. 4 men and a truck. They were out at your back line for 2 days. I asked one of them what they were doing, and he said they were confirming acreage for a client. Dot's voice got careful. I asked your daddy about it that Sunday at church, and he looked at me like I'd spoken French. 4 months. They'd been out there 4 months ago, and my father hadn't known. Or he had known and couldn't hold on to it. Or he had known and couldn't say it. I didn't know yet which of those 3 it was, and I want you to understand that the not knowing was the worst part of that entire first week. Because whichever one it turned out to be, it changed who my father was going to be in this story. Dot, I said, is he home right now? There's a car in the drive, she said. It's not his truck. I called the house line, 6 rings. Then Claudia's voice, warm as a hand towel out of the dryer. Beckett residence. It's Nora. Nora, genuine delight. That's what I want you to hear, genuine. Not a performance she put on when she heard my voice, but the actual sound of a woman having a perfectly good day. How's school? Are you in your final stretch? Your father was just asking. There's a sold sign in the yard. The pause was 3 seconds long. I counted it the way you count a pulse. Yes, she said, there is. Claudia, your father and I made a decision about the property. Her voice went smooth and level, and I recognized it instantly because it's the voice I use with families at 2 in the morning. The voice that says I have already decided how this conversation is going to go. It's 11 acres, Nora. He's 74. He can't get the mower out anymore, and last winter the pipes went in the crawl space and neither of us could get under there. This isn't a betrayal. It's arithmetic. You didn't call me. I'm calling you now. You're not, though. I called you. Another pause, shorter. Well, she said, and I heard the first hairline crack of something underneath. You've been very busy with your program. I made myself breathe. I made myself do the thing I do at bedsides, which is to slow all the way down when everything in me wants to speed up. When's closing? I asked. The 29th. 9 days. And where is my father right now? He's resting. Put him on. Nora, he's resting. Claudia, put my father on the phone. And that's when she said it, not shouting. Not cruel even, she said it the way you'd correct a child's grammar, kindly, so it would stick. Sweetheart, she said, I know this is hard. But I think you've built something up in your head about that house, and it isn't yours. It never was. Your father owns it and your father signed, and there's nothing on that property with your name on it. You don't own a single blade of grass out here. I stood in a study carrel in Lexington, Kentucky, 340 miles from the pecan tree. And I thought about a Saturday in the fall of 2008, when I was 20 years old and a sophomore, and my mother drove 4 hours to my apartment off campus unannounced, took me to a diner, and made me sign 3 pieces of paper she wouldn't let me read all the way through. "It's just in case, Nano," she'd said. "It's boring. It's the most boring thing in the world." She had been diagnosed 4 months earlier. I didn't know that yet. "Claudia," I said, "I want you to hear me say something, and I want you to remember later that I said it kindly." "All right. Don't spend the money yet." I hung up. Then I sat down on the floor of the Carrel with my back against the door, and I called the alumni line at the School of Nursing, and I put in for a 2-week clinical deferral. And while I was on hold, I opened my email and typed a search into the archive of my own life. Amberly. That was the name on the papers in the diner. I could see it, in blue ballpoint, upside down across the table from a plate of French fries I never ate. Cyrus Amberly, attorney at law, Farron, Tennessee. And under that, in my mother's handwriting on the folder, 5 words I had not thought about in 18 years and had somehow never once forgotten. Eliner's land, not the house. I left Lexington at 4:40 that afternoon with a duffel bag, a phone charger, and a laminated badge that said Beckett, N. DNP candidate, which turned out to be more useful over the next 5 months than I ever would have guessed. Here's what I knew, driving south. I knew my mother had done something in 2008. I knew Cyrus Amberly's name. I knew my father had signed a contract to sell 11 acres of Tennessee dirt to a company that wanted to put 84 condominiums on it. And I knew that Claudia had told me I didn't own a single blade of grass, which is a very specific thing to say. Nobody reaches for a phrase like that unless the question of who owns the grass has been on their mind. That was the first thing that made me suspicious, not the sign, the sentence. Somewhere around Bowling Green, my phone lit up on the passenger seat. It was my father. 3 words, typed with the enormous care of a man who has never trusted a touchscreen and hits every letter like it might get away from him. "Don't come Sunday." That was it, no punctuation, no follow-up. I pulled onto the shoulder with the semi-screaming past and called him 4 times in a row. Voicemail, 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 voicemail. "Don't come Sunday." Not "don't come," not "it's fine, honey, we'll talk." "Don't come Sunday." Which meant something was happening on Sunday. Which meant my father, who had never in his life been able to say a hard thing out loud, had just found the only way he could to hand me a piece of information. I sat on that shoulder for a full minute, with the hazards clicking. Then I got back on the interstate, and instead of taking the exit for Farron, I stayed on 65 and drove another 20 minutes to a Hampton Inn off the highway, and I checked in under my own name and paid for 4 nights. Because if Sunday was a thing I wasn't supposed to see, then Friday and Saturday were mine. And nobody needed to know I was already in town. I slept 4 hours and was on Beckett Hollow Road by 7:15 Friday morning. I didn't pull into the drive. I parked at Dots, which sits behind a stand of cedars, and I walked the fence line the way I used to walk it as a kid, down past where the burn pile always was, out to the corner post where my father nailed a coffee can in 1996 to keep the top from rotting. The can is still there. Rusted through, but still there. There were survey stakes every 100 feet, orange ribbon, fresh. And there was something else. At the back corner, where our line meets the Prout line, somebody had spray painted a big white X on the trunk of a hickory that was already old when my mother moved in. You don't mark a tree like that to save it. I stood there for a while with my hand on the bark. Then I walked up the slope to the house. The porch furniture was gone. The 2 rockers, the little table with the cigarette burn, gone. In their place was a set of pale wicker with striped cushions I had never seen before, arranged at an angle, with a folded throw blanket draped over one arm the way you see in catalogs. She had staged my father's porch. And on the front door, at the height where the knocker used to be, there was a gray steel lockbox. I want to tell you that I paused, that I took a breath and considered my options like a rational adult woman with a graduate degree. What I actually did was put my key in the lock, because it was my key, and it was my door, and I had been putting that key in that lock since I was 9 years old. It went in about a third of the way and stopped. "Array kid." I stood on the porch of my mother's house holding a key that no longer opened anything, and I'm not going to dress that moment up for you. Something in my chest came loose. 15 years of professional composure, and I stood there, and my eyes went hot and my throat closed, and for about 10 seconds I was not 38, I was 9, and I couldn't get in. Then I heard the door. Not the front door, the side one off the kitchen. And Claudia's voice, pleasant and bright and pitched to Carrie, from around the corner of the house. "You made good time." She'd been up a while. Full face, hair done, cream-colored blouse, reading glasses pushed up on her head. Claudia has always looked like she's on her way to something slightly more important than wherever she currently is. "You must have driven all night," she said. "Come in, I'll make coffee. There's a little bit of the cinnamon bread left if Warren hasn't gotten to it." She held the side door open. And here's the part that people who haven't lived it don't understand. I went in and I drank the coffee. Because when someone is being pleasant to you in your own mother's kitchen, the pull to be pleasant back is almost physical. It takes real effort to keep your feet. The kitchen had been repainted. Not recently, a year ago, maybe 2. A soft grage. My mother's kitchen had been butter yellow since before I could reach the counter, and I had somehow never registered, in my visits, that it had stopped being yellow. That's what happens when you only come home 3 times a year. The changes arrive under the door in slices thin enough that you never notice you're being moved. "The lock," I said. "The realtor's requirement," Claudia said, filling the carafe. "There've been showings. You can't have a family key floating around during showings. The brokerage won't insure it." She set the pot down and looked at me over the top of it. "I would have sent you the code, Nora, but I didn't know you were coming." "Because I wasn't supposed to." "That's not what I said." "Where's Dad?" "He's not here this morning." "Where is he, Claudia?" She measured the coffee. 4 scoops, leveled with a knife, and I remember thinking that a person who is about to lie to you does not usually take that much care with a coffee scoop. "He's at a respite program," she said, 3 days a week. Beech Grove. It's very good. They do exercise and a lunch. There's a woman who comes in and plays piano and he pretends he hates it." She snapped the lid closed. "He's been going since February." "February?" 6 months. My father had been going to an adult day program for 6 months, and I had spoken to him on the phone probably 20 times in those 6 months, and neither of them had mentioned it once. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because you were in school," Claudia said. "Because every time we talk you sound tired. Because I have watched you carry your husband and your son and 200 dying strangers, and I made a decision that you did not need one more thing." She turned around. "You can be angry at me for that, but don't pretend it was cruelty. It was the opposite." That's Claudia. That's exactly who she is. Every single thing she did to us, she could hand you wrapped in a story where she was carrying a weight for someone else. And the terrible part, the part that made the next 5 months so hard, is that some of it was true. "Tell me about the sale," I said. She sat down across from me, and she did the thing she does where she puts both hands flat on the table, like a person laying out cards. "Harrogate came to us in March. Unsolicited. That was a lie, and it took me 2 weeks to prove it, but I let it pass. They offered $2,800,000 for the whole parcel. Cash. No inspection contingency, no financing contingency, 30-day close. Nora, that house appraised at $410,000 in 2021. The rest of it is dirt." "It's not dirt, it's 11 acres. "It's 11 acres, your father can't walk across." I let that sit. "He signed," I said. "He signed." "With his own hand." Something flickered. Just a flicker, gone almost before I saw it, and I want to be honest with you, at the time I wasn't sure I'd seen it at all. "I hold his power of attorney," she said. "Since 2023. His neurologist recommended it, and an elder law firm in Franklin drew it up. Everything I've done with authority, and if you'd like to see the document, I'll be glad to email it to you." "You didn't answer me." "I answered you completely." "Claudia," I set the mug down, "did my father put a pen on that contract?" She stood up and went to the sink and rinsed a cup that did not need rinsing. "He was fully aware of the decision," she said, with her back to me. There it was. 9 days to closing, and my stepmother could not say the sentence, "My husband signed the contract." I asked to see the house. She said no. Not harshly. She said the brokerage had a showing at 10 and she needed to do a walkthrough, and I could come back Sunday when there'd be time, and she'd make lunch. Sunday? What's happening Sunday? I said. And for the first time that morning, Claudia Marsh-Beckett was genuinely, visibly caught off guard. What do you mean? You said Sunday like it was already a thing. It's Sunday, she said. It's the day after Saturday. I smiled at her. I gave her the whole nurse's smile, the one that says of course, no problem at all. And I said I'd call her, and I let her walk me to my car, and I let her hug me on the gravel, and she smelled like the same perfume she'd worn to Ray's funeral, and I drove out past the sold sign and around the bend and pulled over at the first wide spot on the shoulder. Then I wrote down every single thing she had said, verbatim, in a spiral notebook I bought at a Walgreens on the way in. That notebook ended up being Exhibit 11. I want to say something to the people watching who are in the middle of their own version of this, because I've heard from enough of you now to know you're out there. Write it down, same day, time, date, who said what in their words, not yours. You will not remember it correctly in 4 months. You will remember the feeling correctly and the words wrong, and the feeling is not evidence. The words are: Beech Grove Adult Day Center is in a converted church annex off the highway, with a mural of sunflowers on the cinder block and a parking lot that holds maybe 15 cars. I walked in at 11:20 in scrubs. I'm not proud of the scrubs. I'm not ashamed of them either. I keep a set in my trunk the way other people keep jumper cables, and I put them on in the back of a Sonic because I had a strong suspicion about what would happen if I walked in as a daughter, and no suspicion at all about what would happen if I walked in as a nurse. The woman at the front desk looked up. "I'm here for Warren Beckett," I said. "You're the daughter," she said. I stopped. "He's got a picture of you at his table," she said, and she smiled and she pushed the sign and sheet toward me. "Says it every day. That's my Nora, she's a nurse too." I signed in. My hand was not steady. "Ma'am, is there a restriction on his visitors?" She checked a laminated sheet. "Not on here. Why?" "No reason," I said. That was the last time for 8 weeks that the answer to that question was no. He was at a table by the window with a paper cup of coffee and a folded newspaper he wasn't reading. My father is 74. He was a big man once, 6'2", 4 arms like fence posts, a man who could carry a hot water heater up a flight of stairs by himself and did in 1998 out of pure stubbornness. He's smaller now. That's the thing nobody warns you about. They get smaller and the clothes stay the same size. He looked up and his whole face changed. "Well," he said, "there she is." And then, immediately, before I sat down, before I could say a word, "Did you get the box from Cyrus?" I put my hand on the back of the chair. "What box, Daddy?" "Cyrus Amberley," he said like I was being slow, "your mother's box. He was supposed to hold it and then it was supposed to come to you. It was supposed to come to you when," he stopped. His eyes went somewhere. Not away exactly, sideways. "When she was gone," he finished. "It was supposed to come to you when she was gone." "Cyrus died," I said carefully. "In 2019, I think, didn't he?" My father looked at me for a long moment. "Then who's got it?" he said. I stayed 90 minutes. I want to be honest with you about what those 90 minutes were like, because if you've had a parent in this territory, you already know, and if you haven't, I don't want to lie and make it sound cinematic. It was not a scene from a movie where the old man is confused and then has one perfect lucid speech. It was worse and it was better. He was there. He was mostly there. He knew who I was, he knew Miles's name, he asked about my clinical hours and remembered the answer 8 minutes later, which is more than my friends can do. He told a story about the hot water heater and got the year wrong by 2. But the sequence was gone. He could hold a fact. He could not hold a fact in front of another fact. Time had come unstitched, so that 2008 and last April sat side by side on the same shelf, and when he reached for one his hand sometimes closed on the other. Which is exactly the condition you would want a man to be in, if you needed him to agree to something. I waited until we'd been talking about nothing for 20 minutes. Then I said, as lightly as I could, Dad, there's a sign in the yard. He nodded slowly. There is. Do you know what it's for? They're going to fix the drainage, he said. I felt the floor tilt. Who told you that? Claudia's got a fella coming. There's a company. They're going to regrade the back half and put in a French drain along the low side on account of the crawl space. He nodded again, satisfied, and took a sip of the coffee. It's a big job. There'll be equipment. 84 luxury residences. There'll be equipment. I sat with my father in a converted church annex, and I understood with total clarity that he had not been told. Not really. He'd been told a version. Somebody had taken the true shape of the thing. Men and machines are coming to the property. Papers have to be signed, and pressed it into a story he could accept, and he had accepted it because it came from his wife, and because accepting things is what he does. Daddy, I said, why don't you want me to come Sunday? And that's when my father put down the coffee cup and reached across the table and took hold of my wrist. Hard. Harder than a 74-year-old man should have been able to. Because they're coming for the furniture Sunday, he said, and I don't want you to see the house empty. I want you to see it the way it was. Then his eyes filled, and he let go of my wrist, and he said in a completely different voice, flat, embarrassed, apologetic, the voice of a man surfacing. No, I did something. What did you do? He looked at the window a long time. I let her, he said. The law office of Cyrus Amberley was in a storefront on the square in Farron, between a florist and a place that sold vacuum parts. It had been there since 1977. It was still there. The gold leaf on the window had been redone. It said, Amberley Law, F. Amberley, Attorney. I was standing outside it at 8:52 Saturday morning when a woman in running shoes and a blazer came around the corner with a coffee in each hand and a file box under one arm, which is a physical arrangement that should not be possible. You're waiting on me, she said. Are you F. Amberley? Francis, she put the box down on the sidewalk to shake my hand. Frankie, my father's been dead 7 years and people still come in asking for Cyrus, so if you want him, I'm going to disappoint you. I want his files. Frankie Amberley looked at me for about 2 seconds. Then you'd better come in, she said, because that's the only sentence anybody's said to me this year that I actually enjoyed. She's 44. She went to law school late, 31, after 9 years of doing something else she doesn't talk about much. She came back to Farron in 2016 to help her father, who by then couldn't manage the practice, and she buried him in 2019 and then just kept going in the same storefront with the same clients, most of whom are over 70 and pay in checks. The front room was a normal office. Desk, 2 chairs, a print of the county courthouse. The back was a warehouse. 1977 to 2014, Frankie said, hitting a light switch. He didn't digitize. He didn't believe in it. He told me once that a computer will lose a will and a filing cabinet won't, and honestly, given some of the things I've seen, I'm not sure he was wrong. Rows of gray steel cabinets. Bankers' boxes stacked to the ceiling on industrial shelving. A smell of paper and dust and old cigarette smoke that got into my throat and, weirdly, made me want to cry, because it was exactly, the smell of the folder my mother had on the table at the diner in 2008. Name, Frankie said. Beckett, Alina Beckett, and Warren Beckett, 1994. She went down the row, stopped, went back too. Beckett, she said. Beckett, Beck, she pulled a drawer, it shrieked. Okay. There's a Beckett W general file, that's going to be deeds and a will and probably a car accident. And there's. She stopped. There's a Beckett E file, she said, separate. Is that unusual? For a married couple in 2008 in this county, she pulled it out, it was thick. Yes. She carried it to the front and put it on the desk and opened it, and then she did something I've thought about a lot since. She turned it around so it was facing me before she read a word of it herself. It's yours before it's mine, she said. Go ahead. The first thing in the file was a handwritten intake sheet in blue ballpoint. Client Alina H. Beckett, 91,408. Ref by none walk-in. Matter, conveyance trust. Wants, land separated from residence. Note, client requests husband not be billed and not be copied. Advised her of my obligations. She understands. And underneath, in the same hand, a line that made the back of my neck go cold. Client says he'll agree to it, he just can't be the one who has to decide it. My mother knew my father better than anyone on this earth. That sentence is the whole man in 12 words. Frankie leaned over, keep going. The second document was a survey. November 2008, 11.42 acres, with the house footprint and a 100-foot perimeter drawn out and shaded and labeled. Parcel A, Residence Envelope 1, 06 AC. Parcel B, Remainder 10, 36 AC. The third document was a deed. I'm going to slow down here because this is the hinge of everything. And if you're anything like I was on that Saturday morning, the words are going to slide off you the first time. In December of 2008, my mother, who owned the entire 11 4/10 acres outright, because it came to her from her mother, and I did not know that until that morning, conveyed the property in two pieces. She conveyed the residence and the ground under it to herself and my father as husband and wife, with a provision that on her death he'd hold it for the rest of his life. And she conveyed the remaining 10.36 acres, the fields, the tree line, the pecan tree, the entire back half, the frontage on Beckett Hollow Road, all of it, into something called the Eleanor H. Beckett Land Trust, irrevocable, for the sole benefit of Nora E. Beckett. Frankie sat back. Okay, she said. Okay. Say it in English. In English, she tapped the survey. Your father owns a house. He does not own the ground it looks out at. He's got a life estate, he lives in that house until he dies, nobody can put him out, but he can't sell what he doesn't have. And what he doesn't have is 91% of that parcel. So the sale is of 11.42 acres, Frankie said, and he can convey 1.06 of them, and the 1.06 he can convey is the one with a house on it that a developer wants to bulldoze. She was starting to grin, and then she caught it and put it away, and I appreciated that. Nora, if this is what it looks like, they didn't buy a subdivision. They bought a rectangle in the middle of a field they can't drive to. I put both hands flat on the desk, the way Claudia does. Why would she do this? I said. Because that was the real question, not the legal one. My mother in 2008, 4 months after a diagnosis she hadn't told her daughter about, driving 4 hours to an off-campus apartment to get a signature on a document about land. Not about me being cared for, not about tuition. Land. Frankie was already turning pages. There's more, she said. There's a second folder in here. She opened it. It was empty except for a single index sheet, typed, with 3 items listed. Contents E. Beckett held 1. Original Declaration of Trust executed W. Signature pages. 2. Schedule A. Legal description. 3. Sealed envelope personal to be delivered to N. E. Beckett. And at the bottom, handwritten. Removed from office 4211 to client safe deposit, CA. Where's the actual trust document? I said. Not here, Frankie said. Then what did we just read? She held up the deed. This is the deed. This is the transfer, and it's recorded, see the stamp, Book 412, page 88, Farron County Register of Deeds, December 2008. That's real. That's on the public record today, right now. She set it down. But the deed conveys into a trust, and the trust is a separate instrument, and the trust is what says who the beneficiary is, who the trustee is, and what the terms are. She looked up. And Cyrus took it out of this office in April of 2011, 10 months after your mother died, and put it in a bank. Her instructions, I'd bet anything. Which bank? It doesn't say. I sat back in the chair, in a storefront law office on the square in Farron, Tennessee. So I own 10 acres, I said, and I can't prove it. You can prove a transfer, Frankie said. You can absolutely make a title company have a very bad afternoon. But if their lawyer's any good, the first thing he says is, show me the trust, show me the beneficiary, show me it wasn't revoked or amended in 1995, and if you can't, then it's a hole. It's a hole, she capped her pen. But Nora, look at me. It's a hole in their title, not in yours. Nobody can close a $2.8 million cash purchase over a recorded conveyance to a trust nobody can produce. Not legitimately. The word legitimately sat in the room with us. Closing's in 7 days, I said. Frankie looked at the clock on the wall. and then at the file, and then at me. Then I'm going to need you to tell me everything about your stepmother, she said, starting with what she does for a living. Dorothy Prout has a chest freezer on her back porch, a Bible with 3 funeral programs in it, and a shoebox of photographs of other people's property lines. I want to be clear that I did not know about the shoebox before that Saturday afternoon. I knew about the freezer. I take pictures of everything, she said, setting it on the kitchen table. Since the gas company came through in '02 and told my husband there'd never been a fence where there'd been a fence for 40 years. You take pictures, you date M. She's 79 and her hands shake, and she has an iPhone she uses better than my son does. The shoebox was the old ones, drugstore prints, dated on the back in ballpoint. And there, in the middle of a stack from 2008, a photograph of 4 men in the field behind our house with a transit on a tripod, and my mother standing next to them in a green coat with her arms folded, watching. NOV08. That's the survey, Dot said. Your mama had that done. She stood out there the whole day. I brought her out a coffee about 3 o'clock and she was, Dot stopped and pressed her lips together. She was very determined. She'd got thin already by then and she stood out in that wind for 6 hours. Did she tell you why? Dot got up and went to the counter and stood there with her back to me, and I recognized it from Claudia 24 hours earlier, the exact same posture. And I thought about how the body only has so many ways to hold a thing it doesn't want to say. She told me a story about her mother, Dot said. I waited. Your grandmother, Vada, she had 160 acres out toward Ludlow, came from her people. And when your grandfather died, she married again, a man named Sowell, and he was. Dot turned around. He was a charmer, is what he was. And in 1982, he sold every acre of it out from under her and moved to Florida, and Vada Hollies lived the last 11 years of her life in a rented room over a laundromat in Ludlow, Tennessee. The kitchen was very quiet. Your mama was 18 when that happened, Dot said. She helped move her mother into that room. I sat there. 1982, 2008, 2026. 3 women. Same land, same shape, same slow, patient, smiling arithmetic. My mother had not been protecting me from a stepmother she couldn't have imagined. She'd been protecting me from something she had already watched happen once, to a woman she loved, in a life where nobody thought to sign anything in advance. Dot, I said, how long has Claudia been showing that property? Dot picked up her phone. 2 years, she said, I've got 'em all. And she started scrolling, and there they were. Photographs out her side window, dated, the way she does everything. A silver Range Rover in our drive, October 2024. 3 men walking the tree line, March 2025. A drone. An actual drone, June 2025, with 2 people standing by a truck watching it, and one of them was Claudia in a red coat with a tablet in her hand. That fella there, Dot said, zooming with 2 fingers on a heavyset man in a quarter zip. He's been out here 9, 10 times, sometimes with her, twice by himself. Do you know his name? No, said Dot. But he parks at the end of the drive and walks in, and I always thought that was a peculiar thing for an honest man to do. I looked at the photo for a long moment. Then I texted it to Frankie Amberly with a single line, "Who is this?" She wrote back in 90 seconds. That's Grant Pell, he owns Harrogate. And then, 20 seconds later. Nora, why does a principal walk a site 10 times over 2 years for a property that came to you unsolicited in March? They came for the furniture at 9 in the morning. I know because I was parked at Dot's, behind the cedars, with a thermos and a camera I'd bought at a Best Buy in Cool Springs for $400 I did not have. 2 trucks, not a moving company, and a state liquidator, the kind with a logo and a website, 6 people in matching shirts. They worked with impressive speed. Out came the dining table my grandfather made. Out came the secretary desk. Out came the cedar chest from the foot of my parents' bed, carried by 2 men, 1 at each end, and I watched that chest go down the porch steps and into a truck, and I felt something in me go absolutely still. Because I had opened that chest maybe 6 times in my life, and the last time was in 2010, and it had my mother's coat in it. The green one from the photograph. At 10, 40 My father came out onto the porch in a cardigan and stood there watching them carry his life into a truck, and Claudia came out behind him and put a hand on his back and steered him inside, and it was gentle, and it was practiced, and it made my hands shake so hard I had to put the camera down. At 11:15, a silver Range Rover pulled in. Grant Pell got out, quarter zip. He and Claudia stood in the drive for 11 minutes. I photographed all 11. At the end of it, he handed her something. Not an envelope, a phone. He handed her his phone, and she looked at the screen, and she put her hand over her mouth, and then she laughed. Then she handed it back, and they shook hands. And I sat in a car behind a stand of cedars, on the property my mother put in my name 18 years ago, and I said, out loud, to nobody, "All right." That's it, that's the whole moment. No speech, no vow. All right. Everything that happened over the next 5 months started with those 2 words, and I've thought since that this is the part people get wrong about revenge. They think it starts hot. It doesn't, it starts the second you stop being confused. Here's a thing I learned in 8 years of hospice. Nobody hides a lie in the loud part of the chart. They hide it in the part nobody reads because nobody reads it. The part nobody reads in a real estate closing is the title commitment. Frankie pulled the file Monday morning. The title work on 4411 Beckett Hollow Road was being done by Bellamy Title and Escrow, a 2-person shop in a strip center off Highway 96, run by a woman named Renata Cobb. "Do you know her?" I asked. "I know of her," Frankie said. "She was chewing a pen cap. She does a lot of Harrogate closings. That's not illegal. That's just a fact that I want you to hold in your hand while we read this." The commitment was 14 pages. We read it at her kitchen table at 9 o'clock at night with a legal pad between us, and I did what I do with a patient chart. I ignored the summary and went to the raw data. Page 3, Schedule B Exceptions. Item 7, Title search conducted under grantor index name Beckett, Warren A. For the period 2010, present. I put my finger on it. Frankie. I see it. 2010. My mother's deed was recorded in December of 2008. They had searched the record, starting a year and a half after the only document that mattered. "Is that normal?" I said. "It's a thing that happens," Frankie said slowly. "You run from the last insured transfer. If a prior policy was issued in 2010, you search forward from there and you rely on the old policy for everything before. It's a shortcut. It's legal. It's also exactly how you miss a 2008 conveyance. Was there a policy in 2010? Frankie went back 3 pages. There wasn't. Instead, at the bottom of Schedule B, there was one more line, and it was the line that turned a mistake into something else. Item 12. Company insures over any interest arising from instrument recorded Book 412, page 88, said instrument being incomplete on its face for want of trust declaration. Insured to hold harmless. I read it 3 times. "Say it in English," I said. Frankie put down the pen. "In English," she said, "it means somebody at Bellamy Title found your mother's deed, read it, understood exactly what it said, and then wrote a sentence saying, 'We know this is here, we know we can't verify it, we're going to close anyway and the buyer agrees not to come after us.'" The kitchen was quiet. Somewhere in the house Frankie's dog turned over. "They knew," I said. "Somebody knew." "When?" Frankie flipped to the last page, to the little block of type at the bottom that nobody reads. Commitment issued 03192026. Rev. A 05022026. Rev. B 07282026. March 19th. The exception language had been there since the first draft in March, which meant that in March, 5 months before I ever saw a sold sign, somebody sat in a strip center off Highway 96 and read the words Eleanor H. Beckett Land Trust, irrevocable, for the sole benefit of Nora E. Beckett, and decided the fastest thing to do about me was nothing. Frankie filed 2 documents Tuesday morning. The first was a notice of lis pendens, a flag on the public record that says there is a dispute about who owns this, and anybody who buys it buys the dispute too. It cost $42, and it took 9 minutes at the Register of Deeds counter, and it is, dollar for dollar, the most effective thing I have ever purchased. The second was a letter to Bellamy title, Harrogate Partners, and the listing brokerage on Amberley Law letterhead, 4 paragraphs long, attaching the 2008 deed. I asked her what she expected to happen. Best case, she said, somebody sane at Harrogate reads it and calls me by Friday. Worst case. Worst case, Frankie said, your stepmother reads it and understands that her entire timeline just became a problem and does something fast. She was right about the worst case. She was just wrong about how fast. Claudia called me at 6:40 the next morning. I'd like to buy you breakfast, she said. We met at a place in Farron that used to be a feed store. She was there first, in the corner booth, facing the door. She'd ordered me coffee with 2 creams, which is how I take it, which meant she'd been paying attention for 12 years. That was quite a letter, she said. It wasn't mine, it was my attorney's. Frances Amberley. Claudia smiled at her cup. Cyrus's girl. That's Nora, that's actually very clever of you, and I want you to know I noticed. I didn't say anything. That's a technique, ask any nurse. I'd like to make this simple, she said. I've spoken with our counsel. There is a document from 2008 that appears to convey some acreage into a trust. It's incomplete. There's no declaration, there's no trustee of record, there's no schedule, and there's a description error in the meets and bounds on the second call. Did Frances mention that? She had not. She had actually 4 days later, and it turned out to be minor. But at that table, at 7:15 in the morning, Claudia Marsh-Beckett dropped the phrase description error in the meets and bounds on the second call into my coffee and watched my face, and I learned 2 things at once. 1, she had read the deed closely enough to know what was wrong with it. 2, she'd been reading it for a while. So it's a mess, she said comfortably. It could take 2 years to sort out. And in 2 years, sweetheart, your father will be, she paused just long enough, somewhere else. And the offer will be gone, because Harrogate's rate lock expires and they will walk, and then that 11 acres sits there with nobody to mow it, and eventually it goes for $800,000 to a man who wants to run cattle. Or I said. Or, she reached into her purse. It was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. A quitclaim, my name typed at the top, and clipped to it a check. $80,000. I know what you have in student loans, she said quietly. I know what Ray's medical left you with. I know you're 38 and renting. And the thing is, the thing I want to be very honest about, because if I make myself the hero of every second of this you won't believe any of it, I looked at that check for longer than I want to admit. Not because I wanted the money. Because I was tired. Because it was Wednesday, and I had a semester of clinicals hanging over me, and a father in a day program, and a lawyer I couldn't afford. And here was a woman offering me a door out of a hallway I hadn't even fully walked into yet. That's how it works. That's how it always works. They don't offer you money, they offer you rest. I picked up the paper, not the check, the quitclaim. And I read it, all the way through, the way my mother didn't let me do in 2008. And on page 2, in the recital paragraph, was this. Grantor acknowledges that grantor has no interest, and has never had an interest, in the real property described herein, and that any instrument suggesting otherwise was executed in error. I read it twice, then I set it down and slid it back across the table. Claudia, I said, can I ask you something and get a straight answer? You can try. When did you first learn about my mother's trust? She picked up her coffee, she took a sip, she set it down. March, she said. That's not true. Excuse me. You just told me there's an error in the meets and bounds on the second call. Nobody knows that in 5 months while also selling a house and moving a husband into a day program. You know that deed the way I know a med list. I leaned back. How long? Claudia Marsh-Beckett looked at me across a table in a converted feed store. And she smiled, not nastily, almost with affection, like a woman watching a dog finally figure out a gate latch. 2 years, she said. 2 years. Nora, I found it in a shoebox in the crawl space 2 Septembers ago, looking for the water shutoff, and do you know what I did? Her voice didn't rise. Not once, that entire morning. I sat on the floor of that crawlspace for 40 minutes, and I understood, for the first time, that I had spent 11 years keeping a man alive in a house that was going to go to his daughter and leave me with nothing. 11 years of blood pressure logs. 11 years of a woman's wallpaper. So you sold it out from under him. I made a plan, she said. You've never once had to make a plan without a safety net, so I'll forgive you for not knowing the difference. Then she put the check back in her purse, and she said the sentence I have replayed more times than any other in this entire story. You should take it before Friday, she said, because on Friday it stops being about the land. I asked Frankie that afternoon what happens Friday. She said nothing happens Friday. She said Claudia was just rattling me. Frankie was wrong. 2 years, that's what stuck. Not the check, not the crawlspace. The fact that Claudia had known for 2 years and had used those 2 years the way a professional would. Which raised a question I couldn't put down. Where did she learn to do this? Because you don't wake up at 61 on the floor of a crawlspace and invent a 2-year strategy involving a friendly title company, a power of attorney, an adult day program, and an estate liquidator. That's not instinct. That's a second attempt. I started with the obvious. Claudia Marsh, 63. Before my father, there was a husband named Delbert Marsh in Kentucky who died in 2011. She talked about him the way you talk about weather in another state, briefly, warmly, without detail. Farron County keeps its records in a basement. So does Ballard County, Kentucky, except theirs are online, because a clerk there in 2016 got a grant. It took me 2 hours on a laptop in a Panera. In Estate of Delbert R. Marsh, 2011, petition to set aside transfer, filed by Bethany Marsh, daughter. 19 pages. Del Marsh owned a marine repair business and 40 acres on the river. In the 18 months before he died, of a cancer, with a hospice team, in a bed in his own living room, his wife of 6 years had moved the business into an LLC, refinanced the land, and executed 3 transfers under a power of attorney signed 9 days after his diagnosis. His daughter fought it for 2 years and ran out of money. The case ended in a confidential settlement in 2013. Claudia married my father in October of 2013. I sat in a Panera in Cool Springs and looked at those 2 dates, one under the other, and I want to tell you what I felt, and it was not triumph. It was nausea. Because 18 months of my life in the year 2020 were spent doing exactly what a hospice nurse does, sitting in living rooms with families while somebody died, and I know precisely how much access you have in that room, and how much trust, and how little anybody is watching. I called Bethany Marsh that night. She's 41. She runs a dog grooming place in Paducah. She let me talk for 4 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "Is he still alive?" My father, yes. Then you're ahead of where I was, she said, by the only thing that matters. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about the notebook. Claudia had kept a notebook on Del's medications, and she'd shown it to every single person who came through that house, the doctors, the pastor, the neighbors, and by the time Del died, there was not one person in Ballard County who did not believe that Bethany Marsh was an ungrateful daughter who'd shown up at the end for money. She builds the audience first, Bethany said. Before she does anything, she builds the audience. Whatever she's doing to your daddy, she's already told 40 people her version. Church, hairdresser, whoever, count on it. What do I do about that? Nothing, Bethany said. You can't out-talk her. I tried for 2 years. A pause, you beat her with paper. She's real good with people and she's sloppy with paper because people have always been enough. I asked her at the end why she settled. Because they got a doctor, Bethany said, who said my daddy had capacity. And once you're arguing about a dead man's mind, you've already lost. Her voice changed. Nora, your father's alive. Get him evaluated. Get him evaluated by somebody she didn't pick and do it before she. She stopped. Before she what? Before she gets a judge to say she's the only one who can decide who sees him, Bethany said. That was Thursday night. Friday morning at 9:05 a.m., Claudia Marsh Beckett filed an emergency petition in Farron County Probate Court for temporary guardianship and conservatorship of Warren A. Beckett. Attached to it was a 2-page affidavit describing his daughter, a woman who had recently appeared in town, hired a lawyer, made demands about property, and shown up at a care facility dressed as a nurse. I had 11 days to prepare and I used every hour of them, and I still lost. I want to be honest about that, because I've noticed that people telling these stories tend to skip the part where they got beaten. And you need to hear this part, because if you're in the middle of your own version of this right now, there is going to be a morning where you do everything right and walk out of a building having lost, and I need you to know that isn't the end of it. The hearing was on a Tuesday, in a courtroom on the second floor of the Farron County Justice Center, in front of Judge Marlene Cade. Claudia wore navy, no jewelry except her wedding ring. She'd had her hair cut shorter. I noticed that immediately, and I understood it immediately, because it made her look older and softer and more tired, and she did not look tired. She had brought people. That's what I hadn't prepared for. Bethany warned me, and I still hadn't prepared for it. Sitting in the gallery behind her were 9 human beings: the associate pastor from First Methodist, 2 women from the Garden Club, a neighbor from the far side of the road, the director of Beech Grove, and 4 people I didn't recognize. Behind me was Frankie Amberly and Dot Prout, who had put on a church dress and driven herself. Claudia's attorney was a man named Pate Hollies, no relation to my mother's family, and I made sure of that on day 2, who does elder law out of Franklin and has an office with a fountain in it. He put her on the stand for 22 minutes. I'm going to tell you what she said, and I want you to notice that almost none of it was a lie. She said my father had been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment in 2022 and vascular dementia in 2024. She said she had held his healthcare power of attorney and his durable financial power of attorney since March 2023, executed while he had capacity, drafted by an elder law firm in Franklin. She said she had made the decision to sell the property because the house was no longer safe, and she produced a photograph of the crawl space and a plumber's invoice and a note from his primary care doctor about fall risk. She said she had placed him at Beech Grove 3 days a week in February so that he would have structure and socialization, and the director of Beech Grove nodded from the gallery, because that part was true and good, and she had done it. And then Pate Hollies said, Mrs. Beckett, what changed in August? And Claudia looked down at her hands. His daughter came home, she said. That's it, that's the whole knife. 5 words, and she said them sadly. She testified that I had appeared without warning, that I had come to Beech Grove in medical scrubs and signed in without identifying myself as family. That I had, within 4 days of arriving, retained an attorney and filed a claim against the property. That I had told her, and this is the part where my stomach dropped, because I had said it, don't spend the money yet. She testified that Warren had become agitated and confused after my visits. She had a note from Beech Grove documenting that on August 21st, he had asked staff 4 times whether the box had come. She testified that she was frightened, not for herself. I'm 63 years old, she said. I don't need anything. But that man cannot hold 2 ideas at once anymore, and whoever talks to him last is who he believes. And I cannot, Your Honor, I cannot protect him from his own child. Then she cried. 2 tears, not a performance of crying. Actual tears, on cue, from a place that was probably even real, because I have come to believe that Claudia genuinely felt she was the wronged party in every room she has ever stood in. Frankie was very good. She was. She got the sale contract in. She got the 2008 deed in. She got Renata Cobb's insure over language read aloud into the record, and I watched Judge Cade's pen stop moving when she heard it. But this was an emergency, temporary hearing about one thing: the safety and welfare of a 74-year-old man with vascular dementia. And on that question, on that day, my stepmother had 9 witnesses, 2 doctor's notes, 3 years of blood pressure logs, and a photograph of a crawl space. And I had a duffel bag and a grudge, and a set of scrubs I'd changed into in the back of a Sonic. Judge Cade granted the temporary guardianship for 90 days pending full evaluation. She appointed a guardian ad litem, a semi-retired attorney named Perry Nix. She ordered an independent capacity evaluation. And then she looked at me over her glasses and said the sentence that I heard in my sleep for the next 3 weeks. MS, Beckett, until we know more, visits with your father will be at the facility and in the presence of staff. Once a week. Once a week. Frankie found me in the stairwell. Not the hallway, the stairwell, because I'd made it that far and no further. Nora. Once a week. 90 days, and it's temporary and Nick's is. He is 74 years old, I said. He has vascular dementia. Do you understand what 90 days is at 74 with vascular dementia? Do you know what that costs him? My voice came apart. I've watched 200 people do this. 90 days is not a delay. 90 days is a chapter. Frankie let me finish. Then she said, do you want to hear the good part, or do you want another minute? There's a good part. Judge Cade ordered an independent capacity evaluation, Frankie said. Claudia asked for that. Pate Hollies asked for it, because in his experience the evaluation comes back saying the old man is impaired, and an impaired old man's daughter has no standing to complain about a POA sale. She was almost vibrating. But Nora, the evaluation isn't going to be about today. It's going to include a retrospective, and the question the court will ask is not is Warren Beckett impaired in September of 2026. I looked up. It's whether he had capacity, Frankie said, on the day he signed. The Sunday after I lost, I went to First Methodist in Farron, which I had not done in 11 years. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't spite, and it wasn't strategy. My father was there most Sundays before Beech Grove, and I thought there was a chance I'd get to sit next to him in a pew, which was not a supervised visit at a facility, and I had spent 4 days looking for a loophole in a court order the way a person looks for keys they know aren't there. He wasn't there. He hadn't been in months. She'd stopped bringing him in the spring, and nobody had thought to mention that to me, and I found out by standing in the back of a church looking at an empty spot in a pew. Claudia was. She was in the 4th row on the left, where they'd sat for 12 years, and she turned around during the passing of the piece and saw me, and her face did something complicated and then settled into sadness. She mouthed hi. She actually did that. And afterward, in the fellowship hall, over coffee in the little styrofoam cups, I learned what Bethany Marsh had tried to tell me on the phone 2 weeks earlier. A woman named Junie Pratt came up to me first. I'd known her since I was 6. She used to give me butterscotch out of a dish. Nora, honey, she said, and she took my hand in both of hers. I want you to know I'm not judging. Okay. I just think, and I say this with love, I think when you've been away, you don't always see how bad it's gotten. And that woman has done every single thing for your daddy, and if it were me, I'd want somebody to just tell me plain. Tell me plain, I said. Junie Pratt patted my hand. There's no shame in needing money, she said. There's shame in what you do about it. I want you to understand that she was being kind. That's what nobody prepares you for. She thought she was doing me a mercy. She thought she was the one brave enough to say it to my face while everyone else said it in the parking lot. I stood in a fellowship hall holding a cup of coffee, and I understood the exact size of the thing I was up against. And it was not a lawyer, and it was not a title company. It was 31 people who had heard a story for 2 years and had never once heard mine. Bethany told me not to try to out-talk it. She was right. But I did one thing that day, and it's the only advice I have for anybody in this position who's watching their reputation get spent in rooms they're not in. I didn't defend myself. I asked a question. Junie, I said, when did she tell you I needed money? Junie blinked. Oh, I don't know that she ever said. Roughly when? She thought about it. She really did think about it, and that's why I liked her even then. Spring, she said slowly, the plant sale, so April. April. I had not spoken to my stepmother between Christmas and the day of the sold sign. She had been telling people in April that Warren Beckett's daughter needed money. 4 months before I knew there was any money. The estate liquidator was called Second Spring Estate Services in a warehouse in Murfreesboro, and I went that afternoon in the same dress I'd worn to church. The man at the counter was about 35 and had a clipboard and the specific patience of somebody who deals all day with the crying relatives of people who aren't dead. I'm looking for items from a Farron County house, I said, August 23rd pickup. Beckett. He typed. That's a full-service consignment, he said. That's not a clean out, that's a staged sale. Some of it moved online, some of it went to our floor. There's a cedar chest. He scrolled, cedar chest, Lane, mid-century with contents. He looked up. Sold September 11th, 940. With contents. That's what it says. I put both hands on the counter and made myself keep breathing. Can I see the intake paperwork? He hesitated, and then he did the thing that people occasionally do in this world for no reason at all, except that they're decent, and he turned the monitor around. The intake record for the Beckett household had 2 dates on it. Consignment agreement executed 030322026. Pickup 082322026. March 3rd. The purchase contract on the house was dated March 19th. 16 days before my father's property went under contract, his wife had signed an agreement to liquidate the contents of his home. Can I get a copy of this? I asked. You a family member. I'm his daughter. He printed it, 2 pages. He wouldn't take money for it. I sat in my car in a warehouse parking lot in Murfreesboro, and I called Frankie Amberly, and I read her the dates, and I heard her put down whatever she was holding. Say that again, she said. March 3rd and March 19th. Nora, Frankie said, there is no version of this where a woman signs a consignment contract for her husband's furniture 16 days before the house is under contract, unless she already knows the house is going to sell. A pause. That's not a decision. That's a schedule. Then she said, do you have any idea what she did on the 4th of March? I didn't, not then. We found out in discovery, 6 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room in Franklin. And when the developer's lawyer put the exhibit on the table, I had to leave the room for a minute. On March 4th, 2026, Claudia Marsh Beckett called Beech Grove and asked about the residential memory unit next door, what a private room ran, what the wait list looked like, and whether they could hold a bed for December. December. She had picked the month. I'm going to move fast through this next part, because it was not fast to live, and it would be a lie to make it feel exciting. I did not go back to Lexington. I took a leave from the program, which I had to petition for in writing, and my faculty advisor, a woman named Yvette Sandoval, who is a friend before she is anything else, pushed it through and told me not to thank her. I got a job, 3/12s a week at a long-term care facility in Spring Hill night shift, because you can get hired on nights anywhere in this country in about 4 days if you have a license and a pulse. It paid for Frankie, mostly. It did not pay for Frankie entirely, and she never once mentioned that. I rented a room from Dot Prout for $400 a month, which she did not want to take, and I made her take. And on Saturday afternoons at 2 o'clock, for 1 hour, I sat in the activity room at Beech Grove with a staff member 8 feet away and visited my father. Here's what those visits were like. Week 1, he asked me why I hadn't come. Then he told me the drainage company still hadn't started, and I sat there and agreed with him about the weather until the hour was up, because a staff member was 8 feet away with a clipboard, and every word I said was going to end up in a report. Week 2, he was better than he'd been in a year. Sharp, funny, told me a story about Ray and a table saw that made both of us laugh so hard the aide came over. Then, 20 minutes later, he called me Ellie. Once. Then caught it, and his face, I don't have words for his face. He said, I'm sorry, honey. And I said, Daddy, it's the best mistake anybody's made all year, and he laughed, and it was fine, and I cried in the parking lot for 11 minutes. At the end of that hour, he held my hand and said, it's the wallpaper she wants. It was always the wallpaper, and I didn't know what he meant, and he couldn't get back to it. Week 3 is the one that mattered. Week 3, I brought the photograph. Dot's photograph. November 2008, 4 men and a transit, my mother in the green coat with her arms folded. I put it on the table between us, and I didn't say anything. My father looked at it for a long, long time. That's the day, he said. What day, Dad? That's the day, she told me. He touched the edge of the photo with one finger. She stood out there all day in the cold, and then she came in and she took off that coat, and she sat down at the kitchen table, and she told me she was sick, and she told me what she'd done, and she said. He stopped. He was somewhere else, and he was completely there, both at once, which is a thing I have only ever seen in this disease. She said, "Warren, I'm not doing this because I don't trust you. I'm doing it because I know exactly how much you love being agreed with." I sat very still. "And I said that was a hell of a thing to say to a man," my father said. And she said, "It is, and you're going to be grateful for it someday." He looked up at me. "Nano, did somebody buy the farm?" "Yes," I said, "somebody's trying." He nodded, slow. Then he said, "The box isn't in the house." The aide's chair creaked. I did not look away from him. "Where is it, Daddy?" "It's not in the house," he said, "because your mother said a house burns and a bank doesn't." He frowned at the table. "It's got your name on it. It's had your name on it since you were 18 years old, and she made me drive her over there on a Saturday and I sat in the truck." "Which bank?" And my father, who could not tell you what year it was, who had asked me twice that hour whether I'd eaten, looked up at me with his eyes completely clear and said, "The credit union, the one by the co-op. She wouldn't use the bank because the bank turned her mother down in '83. Farron County Farmers and Merchants Credit Union has one branch, a drive-through with 2 lanes, and a lobby that smells like carpet shampoo. I was there Monday at 9:00 with my driver's license, my birth certificate, my mother's death certificate, and Frankie Amberly, who came because she said she wouldn't miss it, and because there was a real chance we'd need a court order and she wanted to be able to file it from the parking lot. The woman at the desk was about 30. She typed my name. Then she stopped typing. "How long has this box been here?" she asked. "I think since 2006. "Ma'am," she said, "it's been paid annually by automatic draft from a closed account with a small balance. Since 2010. She turned the monitor a fraction. "The balance runs out in 2045. My mother had funded 35 years of a safe deposit box rental so that the fees would never lapse and the bank would never drill it. She died in June of 2010. She'd have set that up in her last months, with less than a year of energy left in the world, and she spent some of it making sure a box would still be sitting in a vault in Farron, Tennessee, in 2045, in case her daughter took that long to need it. "You're listed as a co-lessee," the woman said, "since April of 2006. You'd have been 18, I said. "Box 217. 2 keys. I had never in my life held either one, and it turned out I didn't need to, because a co-lessee with ID and a signature card match gets a drill and a form and 40 minutes. They put us in a room with a table. Frankie stood by the door with her arms crossed and did not come closer, and I have never been more grateful to another human being. Inside the box, 1, a manila envelope, sealed with tape gone brittle and brown, written on the front in my mother's handwriting. "Nora, the boring papers." Inside it, the Declaration of Trust, 22 pages, executed December 8, 2008, signed by Alina Hollies Beckett as settler. Signed by Cyrus Amberly as trustee, with a successor trustee provision naming the then practicing attorney of record of Amberly Law, which in September of 2026 was Francis Amberly, standing 8 feet away by the door. Attached, Schedule A, the full legal description of Parcel B, 10.36 acres, with the metes and bounds correct, including the second call that was wrong on the recorded deed. A scrivener's error in 2008, cured by the original, sitting in a vault for 18 years. Beneficiary, Nora Alina Beckett, sole, irrevocable, non-amendable. 2, a single sheet, notarized, dated December 8, 2008. Acknowledgement of life estate. I, Warren A. Beckett, acknowledge that I hold a life estate in the residence structure and residence envelope only, and that I hold no interest, present or future, in Parcel B, and that I have no power to sell, encumber, or convey the same. And under it, my father's signature. His real one from 2008, the big looping W, the way he wrote it before his hands changed. Frankie made a sound behind me. "That's not a deed," she said. "That's better than a deed. Nora, that is your father in his own hand, at full capacity, saying I know I don't own it. No good faith purchaser argument survives that. No, he thought it was his survives that." 3, a photograph. My mother, 44 years old in the green coat, standing under a pecan tree that came up to her shoulder. 4, a letter. 6 pages, handwritten, front and back, in a hand that got shakier over the course of it. I read the whole thing in that little room, and I'm only going to give you 2 parts of it, because the rest belongs to me. The first part was this. Nano, if you are reading this, then something has happened that I hoped very hard would not. Please do not be angry at your father. He is not weak. He is agreeable, and agreeable men do not know that they are being steered, because being steered feels exactly like being loved. And the last part was this. My mother lived over a laundromat. She had 160 acres from her people and a second husband with good manners, and by the end she had a hot plate and a window that looked at a parking lot. I was 18, and I carried her boxes up those stairs, and I promised her something, and she told me not to bother, that it was over and done. So this is the bother. The land is yours, not because it's worth money, because it is the one thing on this earth that nobody can talk you out of, and I have watched what happens to women who only own things that can be talked away. Don't sell it in a hurry, don't sell it to be nice. Love, Mama. I sat in a windowless room at a credit union in Farron, Tennessee, and I laughed out loud once, and then I put my head down on the table, and I stayed there for a while. Frankie waited. Then she said, quietly from the door, Nora, their closing got pushed to October 9th. That's 11 days. I sat up and wiped my face with the back of my wrist. Good, I said, I want to be there. Frankie called me at 11 that night. I was at work in the med room and I stepped into the hall. I went back through my father's mail, she said. Not the office, his house. I still own it, I rent it out, and anything addressed to him personally gets bundled up and left at my back door. I check that bin maybe once a quarter because it's 90% junk. Frankie. There's a letter in it, she said, postmarked January 11th. January, 8 months before the sold sign. Read it to me. I heard paper. Cyrus, this is Warren Beckett out on Beckett Hollow. My wife has been talking about the property, and I have told her what Ellie did in '94, and she says that cannot be right. I do not want a fight in my house. I would like you to call me at the number below and explain it to her so it is not me telling her. Please call the cell, not the house. I put my hand flat on the wall. He wrote to a dead man, I said. He wrote to a dead man, Frankie said. Nora, he didn't know. He'd have been told in 2019 and he didn't keep it. And the letter sat in a bin in my back room for 8 months while she. Frankie stopped. Neither of us said anything for a second. He tried, I said. He tried in the only way he had, she said. He tried to get somebody else to say the hard thing, which is exactly what your mother wrote down about him in 2008. I stood in a hallway at Spring Hill Rehabilitation and care at 11:20 at night, with a med cart parked behind me and a call light going in 214. And I thought about my father sitting at a kitchen table in January with a pen, trying to protect his first wife's promise from his second wife's plan, without ever having to be the one who said no to anybody. I've spent a lot of the last year deciding how I feel about that. Here's where I've landed. He wasn't a coward. He was a man who had been agreeable his entire life and had been rewarded for it his entire life, right up until the day it stopped being a personality and started being a vulnerability. And nobody tells you when that day is. There's one more thing, Frankie said. The address on his envelope, he didn't write it to the office. Where'd he write it to? He wrote it to my father's house, she said. Which means somewhere in that man's head, in January, he knew he shouldn't send it anywhere your stepmother could see it come back. I asked him about the wallpaper on my next Saturday visit. You said something to me a few weeks ago, I said. You said, it's the wallpaper she wants. My father laughed, just a short one out of his chest. For 13 years, he said, every spring, Warren that hallway, and I'd say, all right, honey, and then I wouldn't do it. Why not? He looked at me like I'd asked why he needed air. Because your mother hung it, he said. Twice. Second time she was already sick and she wouldn't let me help, and she got the seam over the door crooked and she wouldn't let me fix that either. He shook his head, smiling at the table. I said, Ellie, it's a 1/4 inch off. And she said, Warren, everybody who walks down this hall is going to see that crooked seam and know a person lived here. He looked up at me. Claudia never could stand that hallway, he said, and I never could take it down. And I think about that a lot now, because I gave that woman near about everything else she asked me for, and it turns out the only thing I ever held onto was a 1/4 inch of crooked paper. Then, after a while, they going to tear the house down. They want to. Well, my father said, they better take the hallway first. Frankie didn't want me to meet him. She said any contact with a represented buyer should go lawyer to lawyer, and that I would be handing them ammunition. Then she looked at the calendar, and at the fact that we had 10 days, and she said, if you do this, you say nothing you can't say in a deposition, and you bring me a copy of every document you hand him. Harrogate Partners is on the 4th floor of a glass building in Franklin with a coffee bar in the lobby. I did not call ahead. I went at 7:40 in the morning, because a man who walks a site 10 times over 2 years is a man who gets to the office early, and I sat in the lobby with a folder on my knees, and at 7:52, Grant Pell came through the door with a gym bag. Mr. Pell. He stopped, he looked at me for a second, and I watched him do the math and get it. You're the daughter, he said. That's the second time somebody's opened with that. He was quiet a beat, then, come on up. You've got until my 8:30. I want to say something about Grant Pell that might disappoint you, because I know what this part of the story is supposed to be. He wasn't a villain. He was 58, built like a former offensive lineman gone soft, with a wedding ring and a picture of 2 daughters on the credenza and a habit of listening with his whole face. He put me in a chair, got me a coffee I didn't want, and said, "Tell me what you think happened." I put the folder on his desk. "I'm not going to tell you what I think," I said. "I'm going to show you 4 documents, and then I'm going to leave, and you can decide what you think." I laid them out in order. The 2008 deed, recorded Book 412, page 88. The Declaration of Trust, 22 pages, executed with Schedule A. The Acknowledgement of Life Estate, notarized, signed by Warren A. Beckett. And the Schedule B, item 12 page of his own title commitment, with the insure over paragraph highlighted in yellow. He read the deed, then the acknowledgement. Then he went back to the deed. Then he picked up the title commitment, and I watched his jaw move. Then he said, "Son of a bitch." "Which part?" "All of it but that part." He tapped the yellow. "That's my file. That's a Bellamy commitment on my deal, and I have never seen that exception, because that exception is on page 3 of 14, and my acquisitions guy reads schedule and the survey and calls it a day." He put it down. "MS Beckett, do you understand what I bought?" 11 acres. "I bought a site plan," he said. "I have 84 units drawn, I have preliminary plat approval from the county, I have a road cut approved off Beckett Hollow that I paid $41,000 to engineer. And every single one of those things sits on," he pulled the survey toward him, "on Parcel B. Which isn't for sale." "Which isn't his," Grant Pell said. He sat back. He looked out the window for a moment at a parking lot in Franklin, Tennessee. "I've got $500,000 in hard earnest money," he said. "Released to seller in April. Non-refundable." "I know." "How do you know that?" "Because your seller offered me $80,000 of it in a feed store." Grant Pell looked at me for a long moment, and then he laughed, one short, disbelieving bark, and rubbed his face with both hands. "Did she really?" "She did." "And you didn't take it?" "No." "Why not?" And he asked it honestly. That's what got me. He wasn't testing me. He genuinely wanted to know, the way one negotiator asks another. "You'd have walked out clean with 80 grand and no lawyer bills." I thought about how to answer that. Because in 1982, a man named Sowell sold my grandmother's 160 acres out from under her and moved to Florida, I said, and she spent the rest of her life in a rented room over a laundromat. And my mother watched that at 18 years old and then spent the last 2 years of her life making sure it could never happen to me. Mr. Pell, she funded a safe deposit box through 2045. She was 44. I picked up my purse. $80,000 is a lot of money to me, I said. It's just not more than that. He stood up when I stood up. He walked me to the elevator, which men of a certain kind do, and at the elevator he said, "Closing's the 9th. "I know." "You should come," Grant Pell said. "I intend to." He pushed the button for me. "Bring your lawyer," he said, "and MS Beckett, don't tell anybody I said this, but don't say a word until the money's on the table." I want to see her sign the warranty deed first. Frankie qualified as successor trustee on September 29th. It took 90 minutes at the clerk's window and one supporting affidavit, and it is, I think, the single most important thing anybody did in this entire story. Because a trust with no trustee is a rumor, and a trust with a trustee is a party. Then we waited. Waiting is the part nobody films. 9 days of night shifts at Spring Hill, of turning patients at 2 in the morning with my phone in my scrub pocket set to vibrate, of driving back to Prutz at 8 a.m., and sleeping until 2, and then sitting at her kitchen table with a legal pad going over the same 4 documents until I could recite the metes and bounds. On October 2nd, they tried to move the closing up. Renata Cobb's office sent a notice rescheduling from the 9th to the 5th. Frankie called it a Friday afternoon move and told me not to panic, and then Diane Wu at Harrogate, who I would like to formally thank, publicly, on the internet, declined the acceleration in writing, citing buyer's internal review timeline. He knew, Pell had told her. On October 4th, my stepmother came to Prutz's house. It was almost 9 at night. Answered the door, and I heard her voice go flat in a way I'd never heard it, and I came out of the back bedroom in a t-shirt with my hair wet. Dorothy, I'd like 10 minutes with Nora, Claudia said. I'm not going to make a scene on your porch. Looked at me. I said it's fine. I went out. Left the door open about 4 inches, which I noticed and appreciated. Claudia had her coat buttoned wrong. That was the first thing I saw. One button off, all the way down, the way you do it when you're leaving the house fast in the dark. You're going to be at the closing, she said. Yes. Pate says there's no basis for you to attend. Diane Wu invited me. She absorbed that. I watched her absorb it, and I watched her understand, in real time, that the buyer's counsel had invited the adverse claimant into her closing, and what that meant. She sat down on the top step. Uninvited, unhurried, the way you'd sit on your own porch, and after a second I sat down 4 feet away, because standing over her felt like something I didn't want to be. We sat there in the dark for a while. I was going to put him in the memory unit in December, she said. I didn't say anything. I want you to hear me say it before somebody reads it to you out of a file, Claudia said, because they will. There'll be a phone record, and somebody's going to hold it up and make it sound like a murder plot, and it wasn't. She looked out at the road. He fell twice last winter. I got him up both times. The second time I couldn't for about 4 minutes, and I lay on the bathroom floor next to my husband at 2 in the morning, telling him a story about his own wedding to keep him calm. And when I finally got him into bed, I sat in the kitchen until it got light. The crickets were going. It was warm for October. Do you know what nobody tells you, she said, about being the second wife of a man 20 years older? Every single thing you do is either your job or an imposition. When I take care of him, it's what I signed up for. When I ask for anything, it's what everybody suspected. There is no version of me that any of these people were ever going to approve of. Not one. She turned her head. So I stopped asking for approval and I made an arrangement. You made a plan, I said. You told me that. I made a plan for a woman who is going to be 64 with no house, no pension, and a dead husband's daughter holding the deed. Her voice was perfectly steady. You'd have made one too. And here's the thing I've thought about maybe more than any other moment in this whole story. Because for about 10 seconds, on Prutz's steps, I almost had somewhere to put her. Almost. Claudia, I said, you could have asked. Asked who? Me. I turned to look at her. In September of 2024, on the floor of that crawl space, with the shoebox in your lap, you could have picked up the phone and called me and said, Nora, I found something, and I've given 11 years to your father, and I'm frightened about what happens to me. She didn't answer. I'd have said yes, I said. Do you understand that? I'd have carved off 3 acres on the road frontage and had it surveyed and put it in your name, and I would not have thought about it twice. It's 10 acres, Claudia. I have never in my life needed all of it. The porch light went off on a timer. Neither of us moved. I know, she said. You know. That's why I didn't ask. She stood up and brushed off her coat. Because then I'd have had it because you gave it to me, and you'd have been the good one, and I'd have been the woman who got taken care of, and that would have been the story at the plant sale for the rest of my life. She went down the steps. At the bottom, she stopped and said, without turning around, "Don't come Friday, it won't be what you want it to be." Friday, the 9th. She wanted me out of that room badly enough to come to a neighbor's porch at 9 o'clock at night with her coat buttoned wrong. Which is exactly how I knew what to do. The closing was at 10:00 a.m. at Bellamy Title and Escrow in a conference room off the lobby of a strip center on Highway 96, between a nail salon and a state farm office. There were 9 of us. Renata Cobb of Bellamy Title, at the head, with 2 stacks of paper and a notary stamp. Grant Pell and a lawyer from Harrogate named Diane Wu, on the window side. Claudia Marsh Beckett, in cream, with a leather portfolio, and Pate Hollies beside her with the Fountain Office briefcase. The listing agent, a young man named Colton, who had no idea what was about to happen to his afternoon. Frankie Amberly and me, in 2 chairs against the back wall, because Diane Wu had asked Bellamy to seat us, and Bellamy hadn't been able to think of a reason to say no. Claudia had looked at me exactly once when we came in and then not again. She'd nodded, pleasantly. Renata Cobb started at 10:04. "We've got a straightforward cash close," she said. "Purchase price $2,800,000. $500,000 released earnest, balance wired this morning and confirmed in escrow at 9:41. Seller is Warren A. Beckett by and through his attorney, in fact, Claudia M. Beckett." She glanced up. "Mrs. Beckett, I've got the POA on file. I'll need your ID again for the notary." Claudia slid her license across. Diane Wu said, "Before we execute, I want to note for the record that buyer received correspondence on August 25th from Amberly Law regarding a 2008 instrument." "Noted," said Pate Hollies smoothly, and addressed MS. Cobb, "We provided your office a title objection response in September. The instrument is incomplete on its face, the alleged trust has never been produced in 18 years, and there's a fatal defect in the property description. Your company has insured over it. We're prepared to close." "That's right," said Renata Cobb. And Pate Hollies added, for the room's comfort, the individual asserting that interest was the subject of a guardianship proceeding in this county 6 weeks ago, in which the court restricted her contact with the seller. "That was very well done, I'll give him that." Renata Cobb began sliding documents. Settlement statement, signed. Affidavit of no liens, signed. FIRPTA, signed. Then Renata Cobb put a single sheet in front of Claudia and said the words I had been waiting 7 weeks to hear. "And this is the general warranty deed. Mrs. Beckett, by signing as attorney, in fact, you're conveying and warranting clear and marketable title to the full 11.42 acres, free of any encumbrance not listed. Sign here, initial the legal description on the second page." Claudia picked up the pen, and she looked across the table at me, just for a second, just to make sure I was watching. And then she signed her name. Frankie Amberly stood up. "MS. Cobb," she said, "before you notarize that, I'd like to hand you something." Pate Hollies said, "Your Honor," actually said it out of pure reflex and then corrected himself. "MS. Cobb, this is a closing, not a hearing. Counsel isn't a party." "Counsel is the trustee," Frankie said. The room went very quiet. "I'm sorry," said Renata Cobb. Frankie set the first document on the table and turned it around. Declaration of Trust, the Alina H. Beckett Land Trust, executed December 8, 2008. 22 pages. Original wet ink. She set down the second. Schedule A, full legal description with the correct second call, which cures the scrivener's error in the recorded deed, and I'd note the error is in the recording, not the conveyance, and Tennessee has been clear on that since canon in 1991. She set down the third. Successor trustee provision, page 19, the then practicing attorney of record of Amberly Law. That's me. I qualified with the clerk on September 29th. Here's the certificate. Renata Cobb's hand had stopped moving toward the notary stamp. "And this," Frankie said, and set down the fourth page, "is an acknowledgement of life estate, notarized December 8, 2008, signed by Warren A. Beckett, 14 years before anyone diagnosed him with anything, stating in his own words that he holds no interest in Parcel B and no power to convey it." Nobody said anything. Then Diane Wu picked up the acknowledgement, read it, and passed it to Grant Pell without a word. Pate Hollies recovered fast, and this is the moment I actually respected him. Even if all of that is authentic, he said, your client's remedy is a quiet title action, not an ambush at a closing table. MS. Cobb, my client is prepared to close and indemnify. Your client, Frankie said, just signed a general warranty deed. Yes. Warranting title to 10.36 acres that a document signed by her own principal says he doesn't own. As his attorney, in fact. 2 minutes after being handed correspondence about it in August, and after her own counsel described that correspondence in this room, on the record. She let it sit. That's not a title defect anymore, Mr. Hollies, Frankie said. That's a warranty made with knowledge. That's personal. And then Claudia spoke. I want you to hear exactly what she said, because it was the most honest sentence of her life, and she didn't mean it to be. He would have wanted this, she said. Warren would have wanted this. He was miserable in that house. He was living in a shrine and everybody in this county let him, and I am the only person who ever tried to get that man out of a dead woman's hallway. Her voice was up for the first time since August, just slightly. And you, she said, turning to me, have not lived in it. You come 3 times a year and you cry at the pecan tree and you drive back to Kentucky, and I am the one who found him on the bathroom floor in 2021 at 2 in the morning and got him up by myself. And here's the thing. That was true. She did find him on the bathroom floor in 2021. She did get him up by herself. She never told me it happened, and I found out about it from an ER record in Discovery, and I have never once pretended that she didn't earn something in those 12 years. She earned a great deal. She just decided what she was owed, privately, and then went and took it, from a man who couldn't hold 2 ideas at once. I stood up. Claudia, I said. Don't. You told me I didn't own a single blade of grass out there. She didn't answer. I want you to understand that I've thought about that sentence every day since August, I said, because it's the only time you ever slipped. You wouldn't have said it that way if you didn't already know it was wrong. Renata Cobb, of Bellamy Title and Escrow, cleared her throat and said, I'm not going to be able to disperse. Colton, the listing agent, said, what does that mean? Nobody answered him. Grant Pell stood up, buttoned his jacket, and put both hands on the table. It means Harrogate out, he said. Diane, kill it. Send the termination today and pull the plat application Monday. He looked down the table. Mrs. Beckett, I've been in this business 31 years. I have bought land from people going through divorces, bankruptcies, and one guy in an ankle monitor. I have never once been sold something that the seller had a signed piece of paper saying he didn't own. There is a legal argument, Pate Hollies began. There's $500,000 of my earnest money, Grant Pell said, and I want to know where it is. Claudia Marsh Beckett looked at the table. And in that silence, in that specific, 4-second silence in a conference room off a strip center lobby, every single person in that room understood the answer to a question nobody had asked yet. Dr. Anselm Roy is a geriatric psychiatrist at Vanderbilt who does about 40 court-ordered capacity evaluations a year and has, according to Frankie, exactly one professional flaw. He cannot be hurried. His report came in on October 22nd, 31 pages. I'm going to give you the 4 sentences that mattered. On current capacity, Mr. Beckett presents with moderate vascular dementia with significant executive dysfunction and impaired sequential reasoning. He retains long-term autobiographical memory with unusual clarity. On retrospective capacity, as of March 2023, when the power of attorney was signed, records indicate mild cognitive impairment. Capacity to execute was likely intact. On retrospective capacity, as of March 2026, when the sale contract was executed on his behalf. Contemporaneous records, including the February 2026 Beech Grove Intake Assessment, a January 2026 Primary Care Note, and the neurology visit of December 2025, describe an individual unable to sequence multi-step financial concepts or retain novel information beyond several minutes. It is my opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that Mr. Beckett could not have formed an informed understanding of a real property transaction in March 2026. And the last one, the one that ended it. Of note, Mr. Beckett, when asked without prompting to describe the current status of his property, stated that a company was regrading the rear acreage to install a French drain. He repeated this account on 3 separate occasions across 2 visits. This is a stable, internally consistent belief, and it is not the transaction that was executed. A stable, internally consistent belief. Somebody had built my father a small, comfortable, false room and let him live in it while they carried the house out around him. The full hearing was November 4th. It was not like the first one. I want to describe the difference because it surprised me. Nobody shouted. There was no gasp in the gallery. Judge Marlene Cade read the Roy report, and Perry Nix, the guardian ad litem, 71 years old, in a brown suit, who had spent 8 weeks quietly visiting my father twice a week without telling either side he was doing it, gave a report of about 9 minutes that I have never forgotten. Your Honor, I've done this work for 19 years, Perry Nix said. This is the first time I've filed a report where the protected person told me, unprompted in his own words, what he wanted. He said, I want my girl to be able to come see me without somebody standing there. He turned a page. I'd add one observation. Mrs. Beckett's care of her husband has been, in the physical sense, excellent. His medications are correct. His weight is stable. He is clean, he is fed, and he has social engagement 3 days a week. I want that in the record because it's true and because it's the hardest part of this case. He closed the folder. But a guardianship is not a reward for service. And this petition was filed 3 days after MS. Beckett's attorney sent a title letter, and 5 months after the property went under contract, and I'm not able to describe that timing as coincidental. Judge Cade vacated the temporary guardianship. She appointed Perry Nix as limited conservator of the person, with instructions to consult the daughter. She revoked the durable financial power of attorney for undue influence and self-dealing, effective immediately, and ordered a full accounting of every transaction executed under it since March 2023 within 30 days. And then she said one more thing, in a completely level voice, without looking up from her notes. MS. Cobb of Bellamy title is to be copied on this order. And the clerk will forward a copy of the Roy report and this order to the District Attorney's Office, Elder Abuse Unit, and to the Tennessee Real Estate Commission. Pate Hollies said, Your Honor. Mr. Hollies, said Judge Cade, I'm not making a finding. I'm making a referral. They can decide. That night, Frankie and I sat on Dot Pruitt's back porch, and Dot brought out a bottle of something from 1998 that had been in a cabinet since her husband died, and we drank about an inch each and didn't say much. At some point, Dot said, Ellie'd have hated all this. I looked up. She'd have hated a courtroom, Dot said. She'd have hated the whole business of it, all these people talking about her land in a room with fluorescent lights. Probably. But she built it so you'd win, Dot said. That's the thing about your mama that people got wrong. Everybody thought she was soft because she was kind. She screwed the cap back on the bottle. That woman stood out in a November field for 6 hours with cancer in her and made 4 men measure a fence line twice. The accounting was due December 4th. Pate Hollies withdrew as counsel on November 19th. That's a thing lawyers do when a client's story changes. He filed 2 paragraphs citing professional considerations, and Frankie read it and said, she lied to him about something, and it was something he can't unhear. Claudia's new attorney was from Nashville, hourly, and much less friendly. The accounting came in at 4:52 p.m. on the deadline, and it was 340 pages, and it was, I am told, deliberately terrible, which is a strategy that works right up until the moment the other side is a woman who has spent 15 years reading charts written by exhausted people at 3 in the morning. I found it in 11 days. Marsh Legacy Holdings, LLC, registered in Tennessee, March 2025, a full year before the sale contract. Sole member, Claudia M. Beckett, registered agent, a service in Memphis. Between April and August of 2026, 4 transfers out of the joint account into Marsh Legacy Holdings. 180,000, 95,000, 88,000, 49,000. $412,000 of Grant Pell's non-refundable earnest money. And out of Marsh Legacy Holdings. 61,000 to an estate liquidator and a storage facility in Murfreesboro. 14,300 to a Nashville jeweler. 9,800 to a plastic surgery practice in Brentwood. And 284,000 earnest, non-refundable, and now, legally speaking, somebody else's, wired on July 31st as an all-cash purchase deposit on a 2-bedroom unit in a golf community outside Ocala, Florida. I sat in Dot Prout's spare bedroom with a laptop and a highlighter, and I read that wire, and I put my hand over my mouth. Because in 1982, a man named Sowell sold my grandmother's 160 acres and moved to Florida, and I do not believe in signs, and I sat there anyway for about 5 minutes not believing in them very hard. I called Frankie. She bought a condo, I said, in Ocala with his money. With Pell's money, Frankie said, and I heard her sit up. Nora, that's not a family dispute anymore. That's conversion of escrowed funds she warranted she was entitled to. Harrogate going to have a field day. They did. Harrogate Partners filed in Williamson County Chancery on December 22nd. Breach of contract, breach of warranty, fraud in the inducement, and unjust enrichment against Claudia M. Beckett individually and Marsh Legacy Holdings, LLC. They named Bellamy Title as a co-defendant. And Renata Cobb, who had insured over a recorded deed she had read, and who apparently very much wanted to keep her license, filed a cross-claim in January that included 2 years of emails. Emails between Renata Cobb and Claudia Marsh Beckett. The earliest one was dated November 2024, 2 months after a woman found a shoebox in a crawlspace. Subject, quick question Renata, hypothetically. If there is an old deed on record that puts acreage in a trust, and the trust document doesn't exist anywhere, how much of a problem is that for a sale? Asking for a friend, C. Frankie printed that one and put it in a plastic sleeve and did not have to explain to me why. There is a part of this that people always want to hear about, and I understand why, and I'm going to give it to you straight. The Garden Club. Claudia had been on the board of the Farron Garden Guild for 9 years and vice president for 4, and it was, I promise you I am not being cute, the great pride of her life. There is a photograph of her from 2019 in the Farron Ledger in a straw hat at the spring plant sale, and she had it framed in the hallway. In the crooked seam hallway. She hung it there. In February, the Guild's board voted to restructure the officer slate for the coming year. Nobody said why. Nobody ever says why. 2 women from that board had sat in a courtroom gallery behind her in August, and one of them had read the ledger's 3-paragraph write-up of the Chancery filing in January. She lost a settlement she will be paying on for a long time. She lost a condo deposit. She lost a power of attorney, a house, and a husband. But I watched her at a deposition in March, and I want to tell you the only moment in all of it that Claudia Marsh Beckett's face actually came apart. It was not when the wire transfers went in. It was when Diane Wu, reading from a list of exhibits, said flatly, Exhibit 44, letter from the Farron Garden Guild dated February 9th. That's when she flinched. Some people fear poverty, some people fear prison. She feared being seen, and she had spent 2 years and $400,000 building a life in which she never would be, and it came down in a conference room in Franklin over a plant sale. I've run ahead of myself. Let me go back to December, because there's one afternoon in all of this that I owe you, and it isn't the one in the conference room. Here is the part that nobody understood until Frankie drew it on a napkin, including, for a while, me. The residence envelope is 1.06 acres, a rectangle with a house in the middle of it. It has no road frontage. The driveway, the gravel turnaround, the whole 290 feet of it from Beckett Hollow Road up to the porch, crosses Parcel B. My mother did that on purpose. I know she did, because in the margin of Cyrus Amberley's 2008 intake sheet, next to the note about the survey, is one line in his blue ballpoint. Client declined to include drive in Parcel A, Advised of access issues. Client stated she was aware. She was aware. Warren Beckett has a life estate in that house, and with it an implied easement to get to his own front door, and nobody on this earth, not me, not a judge, not the state of Tennessee, can take either one away from him. He can live there until his last day. That was the whole design. But an easement that exists to serve a life tenant serves the life tenant. It does not serve his wife. Claudia Marsh Beckett had lived in that house for 13 years as a spouse. She had no deed, no lease, no ownership, and no independent right of access. Every single thing she had out there came through Warren. And on December 9th, in a small conference room with Perry Nix present and a court reporter taking it down, my father asked a simple question, on a good morning, in his own words, said this: "I'd like her to go." Nix asked him if he understood what that meant. "It means I'll be by myself," my father said. "I've been by myself for a while now, son. I'd just like to stop pretending about it." I served the notice myself. Frankie fought me on it. She said a process server exists for a reason and that showing up in person was emotional and unnecessary and possibly unwise. She was right on all 3 counts, and I did it anyway. It was a Tuesday in the middle of December, gray and about 40 degrees, and I drove up the gravel and parked at the turnaround, and the wicker furniture was still on the porch with the striped cushions gone dark from the weather. She opened the door before I knocked. She looked, I want to be careful here, because it would be easy and satisfying to tell you she looked destroyed, and she didn't. She looked thinner. Her hair was still done. She'd put on lipstick to answer her own front door in an empty house in December, and I understood everything about her in that one detail. "Nora. Claudia. Do you want to come in?" "No," I said. "I'd rather do it out here." I handed her the envelope. She took it and didn't open it. 30 days, I said. January 14th. That's more than the law requires, and it's what I asked Frankie for. How generous. It's not generous, it's 30 days. I put my hands in my coat pockets. I want to say 2 things and then I'll go. She waited. First, your things are yours. Everything you brought and everything you bought, you take all of it, and I won't argue about a single item, and if you need help lifting anything you can call me and I will come. I meant it. She knew I meant it, which I think made it worse. Second, there are 11 boxes at the storage place in Murfreesboro that came out of this house. Some of them are my mother's. Some of them are yours. I'd like to go through them with you instead of with lawyers, because doing it with lawyers is going to cost us both about $9,000, and neither of us has it. Claudia looked at the envelope in her hands. "And what do you want in return?" she said. "One true thing." "What?" "Say one true thing about my mother," I said. "You've lived in her house for 13 years. You've slept in her bedroom. You know where she kept the flour, and you know which stair creaks, and you know that seam over the door is crooked. Say one true thing about her, and I will drive to Murfreesboro with you Saturday, and I'll help you carry your boxes. And I want you to really know that I meant that too. I was not setting a trap. I had gotten to a place by December where I would have taken almost anything. She had good handwriting. She kept a clean kitchen. Anything." Claudia stood on the porch of my mother's house in the cold, with a 30-day notice in her hand. And she said, "Your mother was a small, frightened woman who couldn't stand the idea of being forgotten, so she made sure a piece of dirt would remember her. She looked me right in the face. And she raised a daughter who'd spend a year of her life defending it, which was the whole point. Ellie Beckett got exactly what she wanted, Nora. She got a monument. She just needed somebody to carry it." The wind moved in the pecan tree. I nodded once. "Okay," I said. And I turned around and walked down the steps and got in my car, and she called out behind me, the only time her voice ever cracked in front of me. "That's not an answer, is it? You wanted something you could forgive." I stopped with my hand on the door. "Yes," I said, "I did." She left on January 11th, 3 days early, in a rented box truck, and I did not go to Murfreesboro with her, and 11 boxes came back to me in April by court order. The cedar chest was not among them. It sold on September 11th for $940, with contents to somebody in Georgia, and my mother's green coat went with it. I've made my peace with the coat, mostly. My father came home on a Saturday in the middle of January. Perry Nix drove him. I'd wanted to, and Nick said, gently, that it was better if the conservator did it, and he was right about that the way he'd been right about everything else. The house was empty. I'd had 5 days and I'd done what I could. His bed was back, and a recliner, and a kitchen table from an estate sale in Colombia that was not my grandfather's table, but was close enough that from the door you'd have to look twice. He came up the steps slow, holding the rail. He stopped in the front hall, and he put his hand flat on the wallpaper, right under the crooked seam over the door. "There it is," he said. Then he walked through the whole house, every room, and he didn't say much. And in the back bedroom, he stood at the window for a long time looking out at the field, where 4 men had set up a transit in November of 2008. "Is it still ours?" he said. "It's still yours." "No," he turned around. "Is it still ours?" I understood what he was asking. "Yes," I said, "it's still ours." We had a conversation that night that I'd been dreading for 6 months, and it was not the conversation I'd been dreading. I'd been braced for excuses. I'd built a whole armor for excuses. He sat in the recliner with a cup of coffee. He wasn't drinking, and he said, "I knew." "Dad." No, let me get it out while I've got it." He held up a hand. "I knew in January. I wrote a letter. And when Cyrus didn't call me back, I let it go, because letting things go is what I do, and because part of me was relieved that nobody called." He looked at the coffee. "You want to know the truth of it? I wanted somebody else to stop her. I wanted it stopped, and I did not want to be the man who stopped it. And there's a word for that." "Dad." "There's a word for that," he said again, "and it isn't sick." I was sick. But I was that before I was sick, and I was that when your mother was alive, and she knew it, and she loved me anyway, and then she went and did something about it, because she was smarter than the both of us. He looked up. "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me tonight," he said. "I'd just like you to know I'm not confused about what happened. And I want to tell you something about Mercy, since we're at the end here. I've sat with 200 and some people while they died. Almost all of them, at the end, wanted to say a version of what my father said in that recliner. And the ones who got to say it out loud to somebody who stayed in the room went easier. Every single time. So I stayed in the room. "I forgive you," I said. "You don't have to say it tonight." "I know," I said, "that's why it counts." I finished my degree in May. I drove up to Lexington for the Hooding and Miles, flew in from Chicago and Prout rode along in the back seat with a thermos and complained about the interstate for 4 hours. My father couldn't make the trip. He watched it on a laptop from the kitchen table with an aide named Rennie who has become, in a way I didn't plan and don't fully understand, part of this family. Harrogate suit settled in June. I'm not permitted to give you the number. I'll tell you that a 2-bedroom unit outside Ocala went back on the market, and that Claudia Marsh Beckett lives in Paducah now, in an apartment, and that the state's elder abuse referral resulted in a diversion agreement and restitution rather than charges, which I have complicated feelings about and have decided not to litigate in my own head anymore. Renata Cobb surrendered her title license in April. I recorded the trust in September, the whole 22 pages, plus Schedule A, plus my father's 2008 acknowledgement. Book 1129, page 402, Farron County Register of Deeds. It cost $68. I stood at that counter and watched a clerk stamp it, and thought about my mother standing at what was probably the same counter, in the same building, in December of 2008, 6 months after a diagnosis she hadn't told her daughter about, paying her $16 and going home to make dinner. The developers still call. 2 or 3 a year now, since the county extended the sewer line. One of them mailed me a letter last spring with a number in it that made me sit down on the porch steps. And I have a stock answer, and I'll give it to you the way I give it to them. My father is 75. He sits on that porch most afternoons from about 3 o'clock in a chair that is not the right chair. Under a tree my mother planted the spring he built the porch. In the fall it drops more pecans than 2 people could pick up in a month, and we don't pick them up, and that drives Prout out of her mind. Last month he was out there, and I came around the corner with the mail, and he had one in his hand, turning it over. "Your mother told me these wouldn't bear for 15 years, he said. "I told her that was a fool thing to plant. And she said, Warren, in 15 years we'll still be here." He put it in his shirt pocket. She got 20, he said. An hour after I got a photograph in a lecture hall, a woman told me on the telephone, kindly, so it would stick, that I didn't own a single blade of grass out there. She was standing in my mother's kitchen when she said it, and every blade of grass she could see out that window over the sink had been mine since I was 20 years old. My mother left me 10 acres, a crooked seam over a doorway, and one instruction, written in a shaking hand by a 44-year-old woman who had watched exactly this happen once before and decided it would not happen twice. Don't sell it in a hurry. Don't sell it to be nice. I'm 39 years old. I have a father on my porch, a license on my wall, and 10.36 acres of Tennessee dirt under my feet. And nobody has talked me out of one single thing since. If you stayed with me to the end of this one, thank you. I know 2 hours is a long time to give a stranger. Somewhere out there, somebody is being told they're imagining it, that they're being difficult, that there's nothing with their name on it. If that's you, I hope you heard the part about the paper. Subscribe to Revenge Lab, and I'll keep telling you the ones that end the way they should.